What about the rapture and the Old Testament saints? Now, some of the things I'm going to show you here I'm sure will be a shock to many believers in the pre-tribulation rapture. So let's go ahead and see what pre-tribulation teachers teach about the Old Testament saints. First of all, what does the Bible say? Well, in Hebrews 9:15 it says, "And for this cause," talking about Jesus and his death and resurrection, "he is the mediator of a new covenant, that a death having taken place for the redemption of the transgressions that were under the first covenant, that they have been called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance." Now, the writers of centuries past wrote this: under the first covenant, here there is a definite statement that the real value in the typical sacrifices under the Old Testament system was in the realization in the death of Christ. It is Christ's death that gives worth to the types that pointed to him. So then, the atoning sacrifice of Christ is the basis of the salvation of all who are saved before the cross and since. That's from Robertson's Word Pictures. For the redemption of the transgressions, to make atonement for the transgressions which were committed under the old covenant, which is the blood of bulls and calves, could not do. So the death of Jesus had respect to all the time antecedent, that is, before it, as well as to all the time afterward, till the conclusion of the world. That is Adam Clarke. Mr. Clarke is saying the death of Jesus Christ not only forgives sins after the cross, but before the cross, for those who under the old covenant went through the sacrifices looking forward to a better sacrifice, and that is Christ. Hebrews 9:15 again, for the redemption of the transgressions that were under the first covenant. That is, for the redemption of transgressions from the guilt and punishment of those sins which were committed in the time of the old covenant. John Wesley. So the believers before Christ died looked forward to the death of the Messiah in some way through the sacrifices, and they are saved exactly the same way you and I are saved. They are part of the body of the Messiah. Again, for the redemption of the transgression that were under the first testament, that the blood of Christ would now avail for the remission of all those sins which could not be expiated by the sacrifices offered under the law. It not only contemplated the remission of all the offences committed by the truly pious under that law, but would now avail to put away sin entirely. No sacrifice which people could offer would avail, but the blood of Christ would remove all that guilt. How wonderful! Christ's death did not just save people after the cross, but it saved those truly pious ones who through the sacrifices before the cross looked forward to the Messiah, looked forward to a greater redemption. That is what these people are saying. That is what Hebrews 9:15 says. However, what do the modern pre-tribulation rapture teachers say about the Old Testament saints? They say they are not a part of the church, the body of the Messiah. They are not permitted to experience the rapture and the resurrection, not until after the tribulation. Why do they do this? I'm telling you why. Because the Bible speaks clearly of a resurrection after the tribulation. Jesus spoke about coming after the tribulation to collect the saints. But because the pre-tribulation rapture teachers have to have a rapture before the tribulation, they have to somehow fit in this resurrection after the tribulation and say that is reserved only for those that went before, for the Old Testament saints who now are not a part of the church. That is a heresy. That is absolutely disgusting. According to pre-tribulation teaching, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, all the prophets and the Old Testament saints who looked down through history and who were saved by the future sacrifice of the Messiah, just the same way as you and me, will not be permitted to participate in the rapture. That is what they are saying. Because they belong to another dispensation other than the church, and therefore they teach that these great saints who founded us, who look forward to the Messiah, are now excluded from the body of their own Messiah. Not even King David, ancestor of the Messiah himself, not even David will be present at the rapture. That is what they teach. It is a heresy. These saints are in heaven now with the Messiah. But presumably when the rapture takes place, those who came to believe in the Messiah from Pentecost onward will have to leave their fellow saints in heaven and return with the Messiah for the pre-tribulation rapture. Sorry guys, but you're second-class citizens of the kingdom. You rise later. As we have just read, this goes directly against the clear teaching of the Jewish Bible we hold in our hands today. But John MacArthur and others like him say this. One question that isn't dealt with in the rapture is, when will the Old Testament saints be resurrected? Well, the bodies of the Old Testament saints are still here on earth, but their spirits are in heaven. I believe Jesus took them to heaven after he died. When Christ died, his spirit went to a place of blessedness, where all the souls of the Old Testament saints were, and carried them to glory. But the bodies of the Old Testament saints will have to wait until after the tribulation before they are resurrected and glorified. They will be resurrected when the bodies of the tribulation saints are resurrected. That's John MacArthur, Signs of Christ's Return, Matthew 25:32, tape GC 2379. He is saying these saints will have to wait until after the tribulation. After. And in doing this, they create not only a two-tier system, but a three-tier system. Because you have now in heaven the church, you have the Old Testament saints, and according to pre-tribulation teaching, you have the tribulation saints who are saved during the tribulation, but again are not a part of the church. This is absolutely ridiculous teaching. It is a heresy. It goes against all that the prophets and the Messiah and the apostles taught. How can you ever believe such nonsense? Dr. David Reagan says this. Some people are startled by the thought that the Old Testament saints will not be resurrected until the end of the tribulation, but keep in mind that the rapture is a promise to the church, and the church only. Also, the book of Daniel makes it clear that the Old Testament saints will be resurrected at the end of the time of distress. That's resurrections and judgments, how many and when. Listen, friends, this is what Mr. Reagan is saying. He said this rapture is a promise for the church and the church only. Well, that's odd, because Stephen in Acts, as he stood before the Sanhedrin, spoke about the church in the wilderness. So they're saying Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, those who travelled through the wilderness, those who went through the sacrifices, those who look forward to the Messiah, are not allowed to be a part of their own Messiah's body. They're not allowed to be a part of the church. Oh no, that's reserved for those who come after the resurrection of Christ, after his sacrifice, after Pentecost. It says in Hebrews, women receive their dead, raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. A better resurrection? You're telling me then that their resurrection is better than the rapture resurrection? Well, that's absolute nonsense. Their resurrection is the same as the rapture resurrection at the end of the tribulation. There is no pre-tribulation rapture. It doesn't speak about it. Show me one verse in the entire Bible that speaks of a pre-tribulation rapture, that Christ will come before the tribulation. It doesn't mention it once. It says others had the trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, they were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and in caves of the earth. Yet us in the West and the rest of the world who relax in our churches every Sunday are worth more. These people died looking forward to the Messiah. You have him, and you dare to cut these ones off of their own Messiah and tell them they are not part of his body? These all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. Why? Because God, having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. So with us they are made perfect at the resurrection, when we are resurrected together. Galatians says, "For ye are all the children of God, by faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of you as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus. And if ye be Christ's, then are ye Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise." Oh, but you are Abraham's seed according to the promise, and you'll be raptured, and you're part of the church. But Abraham, whose seed you are, is not allowed to be a part of the church, is not allowed to be a part of his own Messiah. That is such disgusting teaching. Yet those saints who looked to and trusted in the coming Messiah for salvation are segregated from the church, simply because they were not among believers on or after the day of Pentecost. And as such, the pre-tribulation teachers tell us they will not take part in the rapture. They must wait at least 7 years before being allowed their new bodies. They are not even allowed to be a part of the bride of the Messiah, the bride of Christ. In relegating the Old Testament saints to also rands, but not eligible for the rapture, these writers are rebuilding the wall of partition. They create a two-tier system, the church and others, when the Bible is clear that all who look to the Messiah and are cleansed by his blood are saved. Since when did all really mean only those who came along after Pentecost? There is no division between us and the prophets and Abraham and David and the saints of old to the church of today. We are all a part of the body of the Jewish Messiah. We are all a part of the seed of Abraham. How dare you, teachers, dare to teach that these men and women who died in faith looking for the Messiah, they're not part of the Messiah's body? They're not allowed to be a part of his body? They're not allowed to be in the resurrection, the rapture? You tell us that the rapture comes first and they are resurrected later? How dare you? Friends, I must end my brief. God bless you for watching.